Hello and welcome to Newington Trinity Church, and thank you very much for coming out and defying the elements. It's a cold night. I'm McDonald. I'm the elder daughter of the late Bill McDonald, whose name and work are recognised by tonight's talk by the very Reverend Sally Foster-Fulton, who we very warmly welcome, and with gratitude, and certainly on my part, happy anticipation. My experience of her words is that they are dependably challenging and stimulating. I'll say a few words. Actually, I should on housekeeping first. Please switch off your mobile phone. Is that it? And there are refreshments afterwards in the Bill McDonald Hall. I'll just say a brief word about my father, because some of you may not be familiar with him. He latterly was also a very reverend. He was moderator of the General Assembly of the Church of Scotland in 1989 to 1990, some 30 years after his service to what was then Mayfield and Fountain Hall Church, that's this church, began. And some of you will remember him as a good and kind and limitlessly generous man whose sermons were profound but clear and witty but wise. The Kirk session here decided to give his name to the hall, the upper hall, where you may enjoy refreshments after Sally's talk, and to establish a series of 5 annual talks. This is the 4th. And for me and my family, he's still here. I can see his face, hear his voice, still learn from his life. I'm humbled to have the privilege of introducing Sally Foster-Fulton, whose voice has, as I suggested, resonated over the years in different capacities. During her year as moderator from 2003 to 4, you may remember that she spoke so inspirationally at St. Giles Cathedral during the service of celebration for the new King, Charles. Within the Kirk itself, well, she was ordained in 1999, and she served in a great variety of roles as a parish minister, working in Scotland and in her native South Carolina. Within the Kirk, she's convened the Church and Society Council. She's worked for Christian Aid. She headed up Christian Aid in Scotland. She's now the UK and Global Church Ambassador, and she's extended that charity's mission beyond regular pastoral care to developing and strengthening its work on facing the demands of human rights and climate change. And that's just a couple of things. She's a very busy lady. She's also written 3 books, and she's agreed, if you have any questions afterwards, if you stick your hands up so it's possible for her to see who might have a question, she will moderate herself, having been a full-time moderator just a few years ago. So I'm delighted that she's accepted your invitation to share her thoughts this evening. Please welcome Sally Foster-Fulton.
Thank you, Sheena. Thank you so much for inviting me to share some thoughts with you. It is a genuine honor to be here. And when asked, I wanted to find out a little bit more about the very Reverend Dr. Bill McDonald. So I Googled. David Ferguson wrote that his sermons were like a fine glass of wine or a Mozart concerto, that only with the aftertaste or regular listening did you come fully to appreciate his brilliance. So what he said, his ideas and considerings, they stuck with you. They encouraged you to wrestle with them, to let them do what wise words do best. Move from your ears deeper into your conscious thoughts, further still into those places where they question your assumptions, your habitual behaviors, your context even. That's a true gift. and one that shares itself for a lifetime with the ones who listen. So it felt appropriate to focus tonight on ways to hear each other. I learned that Bill McDonald was a lover of life, knew how to savor a moment, music, books, the sounds and ideas humanity has crafted, and the lyrical lilt of nature. There is a perspective found when you face the beautiful fragility of your one tiny life by standing in the enormity of the natural world. We all share that, and it stretches across generations. Our mortality binds us. So it felt appropriate to focus these moments on listening deeply. And you know that thing about 2 degrees of separation? My sister-in-law, Sandra, did her undergraduate degree and her PhD here in Edinburgh and attended church here. She was the brown owl at the Brownies, so I asked her if she had any recollections. Her abiding memory is more than a memory. It's a feeling of generous and natural welcome, of kindness, and finding a little bit of home. Bill McDonald's pastoral influence and lived expression, it seemed, caught hold of Mayfield Church. So it feels appropriate to gather and explore how we convey welcome in the ways we communicate in this fractured world. So before we begin, take a moment and settle yourselves into the present and this place. Listen as the still, small voice settles into the silence. Listen. Let silence speak in a language old as time. Listen. Settle in this space as the Spirit spills into your soul. Sit with the silence and drink in the unbidden sounds. Let them wash over you like rain. Rarely is there nothing to listen for. Close your eyes. Let the secret things dance, light and shadow. Rarely is everything darkness. And now for the next few fleeting moments, breathe your prayers quietly to God, who will gather them up and know what to do with them. The world whispers, listen, God is speaking. You don't want to miss this. So why this topic now? Defended corner or common ground, how to escape our echo chambers and seek the still, small voice. Our capacity to communicate and share information has exploded technologically. Would it surprise you that the World Wide Web was only made available to the general public in 1991? That the first working prototype was introduced in 1969, but that was developed by the U.S. Department of Defense? The internet, social media, smartphones, digital data collection, algorithms that hone in on what you scroll through and adapt to give you more of what you like. I have a confession. My Facebook page somehow decided that I liked Little House on the Prairie. How did it know? I clicked on it once and now it will not go away. Technology that is a gift, a tool, and a weapon that races ahead. Think about it. Before 1991, we didn't even know about this technology, much less depend on it for our everyday. I mean, would it surprise you to know that I used AI to narrow down my research just so I could tell you this? Into this mix, we see a swirl of destabilizing shifts, an erosion that is dizzying, the rise of the far right, global backpedaling on climate justice measures, and on the rights so many have fought for, and we thought we'd won, the rights of women, those who identify as LGBTQ+, ethnic minorities, immigrants, and those seeking asylum. Into this dizzying mix, disrespectful, fact-light public discourse is being normalized. And questioning is far too often quashed under the weight of less restrained power. Communication, how we talk to, listen to, discern together, could quite arguably never be more important. Potential, promise, and problem all in this mix, and we are scrambling to catch up with ourselves and what we are capable of doing. There's also a widening digital divide to address. As we depend more on technology, there is a living danger of disadvantaging those who cannot afford the technology we increasingly depend on. Our global landscape is intricately interlinked. Our histories and journeys cross, join, part, and are part of. We lose sight of that at our collective peril. As we grapple with a fractured world when communication and relationship are vitally important, how do we break out of these echo chambers? Because we can easily stay in them. And how might faith and faith communities bring wisdom, offer safe space? Safe, but challenging space. Our issues are complex and full of gray areas. To pretend there is one answer kills conversation. It denies different lived experience and keeps us in a confined and narrow listening loop. There are things, important things, we do know and can bring into this discussion. But there are also some toxic theologies to dismantle and expose. Ways wisdom is hijacked and twisted to work against open communication, a listening to understand rather than a listening to respond. And there's a big difference in those two. Are we listening to understand, or are we listening to respond? There are ways to express our faith that have the potential to close down discourse and reinforce a them and us mentality. Literalism is the belief that in our sacred spaces, anything that can be taken literally must be taken literally. We can coexist well. I have many friends who are more comfortable in that literal space, but they are equally okay with me expressing myself and my understandings of those texts differently, metaphorically, as a story. I'll give you an example. It's one that theologian John Dominic Crossan uses often. The story of the road to Emmaus, just after Jesus' crucifixion, death, and resurrection. In that story, he's walking the road to Emmaus. He's not recognized, and he joins two followers, and they discuss what had happened. He opens the scriptures to them as they walk the road. And then when it comes time to part, they ask him to stay. Stay with us. The night is drawing in. So when he goes in and he breaks bread with them, they recognize him. And they say to each other, "Didn't our hearts burn within us when he shared the texts?" My literalist colleagues will say that's a factual story. And it teaches us that we find Jesus when we walk together and share our bread with strangers. I would see it as a story, a parable about Jesus. And guess what? It teaches us that we find wisdom and truth when we walk together and share our bread with strangers. We tip into dangerous territory when we stop respecting our different approach and space, when my answer is the only one. So you are obviously wrong. Not only are you wrong, but you are against me and against God's truth. Fundamentalism of any kind, and it manifests itself in many spaces, is dangerous, and it disables communication. It is important that we name the model, not point fingers at each other, but name it. Think about it. If I alone have the one answer, then I alone am right. I do not need to listen to anyone else. In fact, their wrongness makes them the enemy. In Mein Kampf, Hitler referred to Judaism as an infection, Jewish persons as germs. He went no further then, but the seed was planted. When that was coupled with the power to get rid of the problem, all hell broke loose. This fundamentalist model is the most dangerous system humans share. And in the country I hail from, it's beginning to become a package. Conflation of religious affiliation with a political stance. Right-wing politics is linked with evangelical fundamentalist expression, anti-immigration policies, climate change skepticism, anti-LGBTQ+, and ethnic minorities. It comes as a package, weaponizing the disenfranchised and scapegoating the most vulnerable in sound bites. Right, wrong, black, white, them, us, with me or against me. We're seeing that ideology stretching itself, normalizing rhetoric that others, so many, fractures us and forces simplicity when there is real complexity. There is a time for thou shalt and thou shalt not. There is also a holy, gracious time to grapple with the gray, not to shy away from vastly different perspectives. We don't have to agree and slip to the lowest common denominator. But if we cannot listen to each other, listen to understand, not respond, we will never find solutions, only tenuous, temporary sanctuaries. I wanted to share a wee example. Stuart and I now live in Falkirk. And in Falkirk, there is the Cladden Hotel, which houses asylum seekers. And for the past months, there have been regular protests outside the Cladden Hotel and regular counter-protests on the other side of the street. We yell across a chasm with the police in the middle. And the ones who suffer while we scream at each other are those men in the hotel who have no choices here. I don't pretend to have the answer, but that's proven not to be it. Deep listening. Listening to understand, not to respond. What wisdom can we bring into this space? Because there are things, important things we do know, and things that we can bring into the discussion. Our sacred texts offer subversive wisdom, not safe wisdom, subversive wisdom that cuts through and calls us back. That treasure chest in a cave where you dive deep, you bring one gem to the light, and you say, look at this, look at this. Over and over and over again, such are sacred stories. Part of the reason they're sacred is they've been wrestled with for generations. Generations. When we move into a space where we unburden the text of literalism from the one answer and from the thou shalt not question the Sunday school party line, we move into a kind of conversation with our sacred texts. Native American storytellers often begin their storytelling by saying this: I don't know if it happened exactly this way, but I know that the story is true. I don't know if it happened exactly this way, but I know that the story is true. So let's think about some of these stories. It's a story in Mark. The healing of blind Bartimaeus wasn't really a name. It just means son of Timaeus. And in this story, we've all heard it. Or if you haven't, go home and read it. Bartimaeus is sitting on the side of the road outside Jericho begging. As Jesus and this large crowd are walking by, he starts shouting. And Jesus stops and calls him. What I find intriguing is the question Jesus asks him. The description in the Gospel of Mark couldn't make it any clearer. As I said, he's not actually got a name. It's just blind Bartimaeus. So why does Jesus bother asking such a rhetorical question? He asks him this: what do you want me to do for you? For goodness sake, isn't it obvious? What do you want me to do for you? Why doesn't he just get on with it and move on? He obviously wants you to fix the problem. But Jesus asks him, what do you want me to do for you? How respectful, how open, how counter to what we too often assume that we already know. The Poverty Truth Commission is an organization that puts people with lived experience of poverty at the very center of decision making. Their strapline sums up their focus. Nothing about us without us is for us. Nothing about us without us is for us. I remember an anti-poverty conference where there was a challenge from the floor that poor people needed to learn to budget better and to cook. And this was something that we could focus on. There was one voice that cut through. Do you know how much it costs to cook a chicken on an electricity meter? I do, because I have one. And sadly, it is much cheaper to buy a low-quality, already cooked chicken than to cook it when you have to deal with the poverty premium of a meter and substandard housing. What do you want me to do for you? What do you want me to do with you? Globally, we desperately need to listen and be led by those with lived experience. They are best placed to lead the necessary change. Are we brave enough to sincerely ask the question, what do you think? What do you need? Where are we going wrong? To center our response on the lived experience of others. It's a question. Another story to conjure with. And if ever there was a text burdened down by one overriding interpretation, it is the story of the Tower of Babel. So what happens if we look at this ancient story and we rethink some of the thoughts that may be settled into a rut? I'll give you a wee synopsis of the story. So after the flood, people, the survivors of the flood, are attempting to rebuild. And they build a tower. They actually build a fortress and a tower. And in the story, God comes and says, no, and messes up their language and destroys the tower, and they are cast to the four winds and to the world. Traditionally, this story has been seen as one principally concerned with the sin of human pride. Pride that would lead the survivors of the flood to attempt to get higher than God by building a tower. Pride that was then punished by God when God outsmarts them, confuses their language and scatters them across the face of the earth. But let's think about that for just a minute. Let's think about what else that's saying. What would it mean in our relationships to others if diversity was really God's punishment? What would it mean to our understanding of creation if difference was seen as a judgment from God? Be fruitful and multiply and abound on the earth. In our story, that was God's command to the children of Noah. And we are the benefactors and the challenged of that godly creative desire. Ted Hebert, who is the Francis A. McGall Professor of Old Testament at McCormick Seminary in Chicago, worked on reclaiming this text, and the work fascinates me. He went back to the original text and meticulously stripped away a lot of assumptions and additions that have inevitably grown up around it. What he found was quite intriguing. A buildup of interpretation and opinion that once headed down a certain path began to be seen as the only path. There are some problematic phrases in the story. The first in verse 4, when the folks say, "Come, let us build for ourselves a city and a tower with its top in the sky, and let us make a name for ourselves, so that we will not be scattered over the face of the earth." The preponderance of commentators used this verse as their basis for their interpretation that the sin of pride was the motivating factor in God's reaction. But when you look at other texts from that same time, it becomes much less clear. Firstly, the city is the primary building project. The tower is second. Secondly, the phrase "with its top in the sky" was used in many other sources and stories. It refers to a fortress protecting the city. And top in the sky didn't refer to anything unusual in those other stories. So it needn't be seen out of the ordinary here. The next part of the verse says that the people wanted to make a name for themselves, implying that they wanted to be seen as superior, but not necessarily. The phrase was often used in writings and simply meant that they wanted to have a good reputation so they would be treated fairly and live peacefully. It didn't have the connotation that we have assumed of that phrase. So where did this pride concept come from? The earliest commentator wrote in the book of Jubilees in 200 BCE, and the story has grown a great deal. Firstly, the author added this to the beginning of the story. "Behold, the sons of man have become evil with perverse counsel. So they're building a city and a tower for themselves." It's not in the text. It's been added later. It goes on to say that after they built the tower, they say, "Come, let us go up into it into heaven." It doesn't say that in the text. And later on, the dimensions of the tower suddenly come to light. So another person has added, its width was 203 bricks, 5,433 cubits, and 2 palms its height rose up. That is 9,960 feet tall, which is 7 times higher than any building on earth today. That is some tower. But it's not anywhere in the original story. And this interpretation gains momentum and keeps on coming. In 100 CE, in the Targum, an idol with a sword in his hand is added to the top of the tower so people can make war against God. St. Augustine in 14 CE comments that the tower is the very symbol of godless pride. Martin Luther in 1535 calls Babel the seedbed of all evils. And John Calvin in 1554 stated that their mad ambition and proud contempt of God caused a curse that the world bears to the present day. Even von Rad in 1972 called this a sad story with no word of grace. But think about it and look around us at the beauty made possible through diversity. Music, literature, art, cultural nuance. What a glimpse of the brilliance of God. To claim this for us, to plan and dream and desire diversity. To be scattered across the face of the earth is to be promised newness and a fresh perspective. A symphony, not a solo. A choir with all the subtlety that blended voices sing. Ted Hebert offered a fresh interpretation. Be fruitful and multiply and abound on all the earth. That was God's command to the children of Noah. But people are people, and we like to stay put. We tend to stay in our comfort zones. So they decide to build a city and a tower with its top in the sky to make a name for themselves so they'll not be scattered over the surface of the earth. And God comes down in the story and sees their city and hears their plan and realizes that, yeah, they'll do that. But God has a better, bigger plan for humanity. And so in the story, God says, hang on a wee minute, or words to that effect. This is a beautiful, varied world. I need you in all of it. This is a beautiful, varied world, and humanity needs to reflect that. So I'm going to plant you all over the globe. I'm going to scatter the seeds of Babel and give you a wonderful adventure. And when you come back together, you'll be so much richer. You'll have so much more to share. The text calls for an embracing of diversity, not a punishment. The tectonic plates have shifted backwards. Climate chaos, conflict, and cost of living combining create an atmosphere of fear of other. When we reclaim our cherished, diverse interconnectedness, common ground expands. As faith communities, we need to offer that expansive space to listen to each other. The story of Pentecost has often been interpreted as the healing of Babel, when everyone came together to understand. But there's a lovely detail in the story that sings a different song. In the story of Pentecost, they are all together in one place, hiding in an upper room. And the Spirit of God sends them out of that room, out into the streets. And it says they didn't go back to speaking and understanding one language, but in the story, they spoke the language people understood. Now there were devout Jews from every people under heaven living in Jerusalem. And at the sound of this wind, the crowd gathered, and they were bewildered, because each one heard them speaking in the native language of each. Amazed and astonished, they asked, "Are these not all Galileans? And how is it that we hear each of us in our own native language?" We need to find ways that people can hear us and that we can hear each other. The subversive wisdom of this text points to that. We need to reclaim it again. Final story. Jesus and the Syrophoenician woman. That is the most awkward story. I love it. A friend of mine once referred to it as the story where Jesus gets caught with his divinity down. But that plays into a common heresy that Jesus is God just playing at being human. No. Fully human, dependent, interdependent, fragile, needing to learn. And in this story, he was working within the frame of his expected mission to call and comfort his community. Because remember, in this story, the Syrophoenician woman comes and falls at his feet and begs him to help her daughter. And what he says to her cannot be domesticated. He says to her, "Daughter, it isn't fair to feed the children's food to the dogs." And she responds, "Sir, even the dogs get the crumbs at the bottom of the table." We are invited to hear her comments, not as beholden and beseeching, but as an open, questioning challenge. "Master, even the dogs eat the crumbs under the table." I don't think this statement is advocating for scraps. I think it's offering a moment when the power, privilege, and prejudice is stripped away. And Jesus saw her. He listened. He learned. He changed. I love the sea change in the story of Jesus after this encounter. In Mark's gospel, his healing and feeding is directed then at whoever he encounters. It goes into hyperdrive. The first encounter following the Syrophoenician woman is with a deaf man. He opens his ears. Be opened, he says. Be opened. The resonance with the opening of his own ears, I think, is beautiful. It's genius. If Jesus, Master, Savior, lover of all, can listen and learn from the lived experience of someone he could have discounted, then surely to God, there is hope for us all. And finally, the third person or the third expression of the Trinity is Ruach, the Holy Spirit, the spirit wind of God. It says of the Holy Spirit, I will not leave you orphaned. The advocate, the Holy Spirit, will teach you everything and remind you of all that I have said to you. We're not finished learning yet. We're not the complete package yet. And we are not, thank God, called to a faith that depends solely on a finished book bound in white leather with very thin pages that belongs way up high on a shelf and comes down when you get married or you die or you're baptized, and it's written in the book and it goes back up. More is coming, this story tells us. And God is with us in it. In the change, in the gray, in the challenge, in the fear. Change is not only good, but called for and promised. There's so much more to explore, discover, understand. I think the fundamentalist rigidity is a fear response. A circle your wagons against others, a closing your ears and minds to anything that might further destabilize our fragile status quo. We can't afford that, quite frankly. Probably my favorite phrase in the Bible is the last verse in the Gospel of John. And this is what it says. But there are also many things that Jesus did. If every one of them were written down, I suppose that the world itself could not contain the books that would be written. We don't know it all. We've not heard it all. And there's still more to learn. So we need to learn to listen. Listen to understand, not to respond. So together, let's listen for the new thing. Thank you.
Sally, that was a splendid lecture, and we were privileged to hear you deliver it. We were all delighted when you agreed to come along to Newington Trinity. We were confident that you would do justice to Bill McDonald's memory, and also that you would inform us, challenge us, and make us think, just as Bill himself did, week by week. And indeed you did. You made us think about the dizzying mix of challenges we face, a cacophony of voices fracturing the world. You made us face the role of faith communities. Do we listen to understand, or do we close down debate? Do we grapple with the grey? You advocated the subversive wisdom of sacred stories, teaching us how to engage with the lived experience of others and how to celebrate diversity. We must indeed seek the still, small voice that you talked of. But I also hope that you personally will continue to be an active and loud voice, a prophetic presence, calling us to action in the service of peace and love in our own communities and across the world. Sally, we're grateful to you for giving such a stimulating talk and for the time you must have spent preparing it and travelling to be with us this evening. There will be time to mingle over refreshments in the Bill McDonald Hall through that door there. But first of all, let's express our thanks to Sally for such a wonderful evening.